Today on Better Book Clubs, do you ever read more than one book at a time? I definitely do. So I'm going to give you a tour today of the books I'm currently reading and the stacks of books that I haven't gotten to yet. I usually have about 3 books going at the same time. One on my nightstand that I read just a little bit before bedtime. One that I'm a little bit more engrossed in the sense that it's a little bit more challenging and difficult and requires a little bit more work as a reader, that I read someplace else at other times, preferably when I have a big chunk of time. And then I usually have an audiobook going in my car. What I'm reading right now is actually a self-published book full of family stories by my aunt. I just finished my uncle's self-published book, and these are really great because they're really uplifting. They're short stories. A lot of them are about people in my own family, and so I'm really enjoying reading those, and it's great bedtime reading because they're all short and I don't go to sleep worrying about anything. And then the more challenging, more difficult book that I've just started working on is a novel called Weather by Jenny Offel. And so I'm reading this. I read it in the car a little bit today while I was waiting for my daughter. I'll read it when I have a nicer big chunk of time because it takes a little bit more work to read a novel like this one. And I also happen to be reading, in addition to that, a novel right now with the Classics in the Western Canon book group on Goodreads, which I'm not always doing. I join them maybe once a year for a read, and we happen to be reading Gulliver's Travels, a classic by Jonathan Swift right now. We're on a schedule for this, so generally what I do is I only read this on the weekend, and I read the portion that I have to read in order to be up to speed by the time the next week's discussion begins. I don't really have a book going in the car right now because I don't have a commute to work right now. Since the pandemic, I haven't been driving as much, but right before that happened, I had a nonfiction book called Mayflower by Nathaniel Philbrick that I was listening to in the car. And what I like to listen to in my car is usually nonfiction, again, because I can't, when I'm listening, string together big, long, complicated plot lines. And so the nonfiction tends to be written in a more linear, easy to follow way, even if the subject matter itself might be dense or heavy. And in fact, sometimes I like to listen to things on audio that I am daunted by if I look at the size of the book, but I know I'll just listen for 20 minutes back and forth on my way to work every day and progressively make my way through that big long book or that big stack of CDs. So those are the things that I'm usually doing as a reader of multiple books. But I also want to take you on a little tour of all the books that are waiting in stacks in my bedroom to be read. What goes along with this compulsion to read multiple books at the same time is having multiple books stacked up waiting to be read. This is probably a really bad habit that a lot of other readers have as well, but I thought I'd just give you a quick tour of what's in my stacks that I may or may not ever get to. I can see the books that I thought I was going to read sinking down towards the bottom. I'll probably get back to them, but I haven't gotten to them yet. And on the top, on the very top, I have a library book that I just picked up called There by Tommy Orange, which has been recommended to me by several people recently. And this one's due back at the library, so I really do think I'm going to read it next. And beneath it is Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. I was at the Stowe house over the winter in Hartford, Connecticut, and I've always been curious about this book as kind of a historical document, and so I picked up a copy of it, and I haven't gotten around to reading it yet. And then there's Steven Pinker's Sense of Style, which is a book about writing and grammar, and at least I think that's what it's about. I just got started on it, and then, I don't know, I got interrupted for some reason, but this might be really good bedtime reading because it's not the kind of book that you have to follow a plot in or that you even have to read all at once. You could pick it up and put it down again. So those are just the top 3 books in this particular stack. On my nightstand, I've got a really interesting book that I picked up at the Strand bookstore in New York City this winter called Flâneuse Women Walk the City. It's actually more of an academic book than I expected it to be. It's by Lauren Elkin, but it's pretty interesting. It talks about different cities and women writers who walked the cities. And this is great because it's very easy to like read one section and then put it down. So I'm pretty far through it, but this has been on my nightstand. And usually what happens is I finish one book and then I read another chapter in here, and then I go on to another book. And I have a whole bunch of poetry and other books in stacks here. And then down below in this spot here, I have a bunch of books that I've always meant to read that I might get back to someday. And books that I've picked up at a used bookstore that looked really interesting. I really do think I'm going to read Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad soon, and maybe even do a video about it for you. And then I have another stack that includes Don Quixote, which I never finished. I started reading that with the Goodreads group last year, and I got about halfway through and I just lost steam. And I have a borrowed book on top here that I really should read soon because I should bring it back to my friend who loaned it to me. And then we have another stack over here of some more books that are just waiting to be read. The classic 1984, the novel Plain Song by Kent Haruf, and so on and so on. And chances are that when I finally decide I'm excited to pick up one of these books, it won't be the only book I'm reading. I love reading more than one book at a time because whatever I'm in the mood for, there's usually a book that I'm in the middle of. And so even though I have these particular times and places where I might read particular books, sometimes I'll pick up a book from my nightstand and bring it downstairs and read it in the middle of the day because it's just more suiting the mood I'm in. So that's one reason I love to read more than one book at a time. I'm probably not the only one. I'd be curious to hear from some of you about your multiple book reading habits.